Fix this helicopter and I'll give you $100 million, the CEO mocked. Then, the maid's daughter did, and his jaw hit the floor. The silence in Hangar 7 cost $10 million an hour. Engineers whispered over glowing screens, their faces drawn and desperate. 9 minutes, 17 seconds, one muttered, and it dies. Every single time. On the observation deck, Richard Lawson, a man used to conquering failure with money and willpower, slammed his fist. Useless, he roared. His empire, worth billions, was crumbling before his eyes. And then, in the corner, a mocking laugh. Maybe we should ask the janitor's kid. Hell, fix this helicopter and I'll give you $100 million. What began as a cruel joke would ignite a chain of events no one in that hangar could have predicted. What started as arrogance ended as revelation. This is the story of how a child's voice cut through the noise of power, money, and failure, and changed everything. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A 12-year-old girl held the fate of a billion-dollar empire in her small, quiet hands. She just didn't know it yet. The silence in the massive hangar was the most expensive sound in the world. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, costing Lawson Dynamics $10 million for every hour it continued. The air in Hangar 7 smelled of failure. It was a sharp, metallic scent mixed with the bitter aroma of burnt coffee and stale desperation. At the center of the cavernous space sat the source of this failure, the Osprey X-1. It wasn't just a helicopter. It was a revolution cast in carbon fiber and titanium. Its twin rotors were designed to tilt, allowing it to take off like a helicopter and fly like a plane. It was faster, quieter, and more agile than anything in the skies. It was also a complete and total disaster. For 3 weeks, the Osprey X-1 had been grounded by a ghost, a flaw so deep and so mysterious that the brightest minds in aerospace engineering couldn't find it. The prototype would run perfectly in all ground simulations. Its engines would roar to life with a clean, powerful hum. The onboard computers, a dizzying network of processors and sensors, reported perfect health. But exactly 9 minutes and 17 seconds into any simulated flight, the ghost would appear. The machine would shudder violently. A catastrophic gyroscopic failure would send the digital aircraft into an unrecoverable spin. Every test ended the same way, with a simulated crash and a cryptic error code that told the engineers nothing. Today was the final day. In less than 6 hours, a delegation from the Pentagon, along with a consortium of international investors, was scheduled to arrive for the final demonstration. They were not coming to see simulations. They were coming to see the Osprey X-1 take to the sky. If it didn't fly, Lawson Dynamics, a titan of American industry, would collapse. Billions in contracts would evaporate. Thousands of jobs would vanish. Richard Lawson, the company's founder and CEO, stood on the executive observation deck, staring down at his broken dream. At 55, Lawson was a man forged in the fires of corporate warfare. He had a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He had built his empire with brilliant engineering and brutal business tactics. He never accepted excuses. He never tolerated failure. Now, failure was the only thing he had. Report, he barked, his voice echoing in the glass-enclosed room. David Chun, his lead engineer, flinched. Chun was a genius, a celebrated graduate from MIT with a mind that could dance with complex physics. But for 3 weeks, he had been humbled by this machine. Dark circles hung under his eyes. His tie was loose, and his usually immaculate shirt was wrinkled. "No change, sir," Chun said, his voice hoarse. "We've run every diagnostic. We've rebuilt the software from the ground up. We've swapped out the entire gyroscopic stabilizer unit. Twice. The result is always the same. 9 minutes, 17 seconds, and it fails." "That's not a reason, David. That's a tombstone," Lawson snarled. He paced the deck like a caged lion, his expensive Italian shoes clicking a rhythm of pure fury against the polished floor. "You have a team of 30 engineers out there. Their combined salaries could fund a small country. What are they doing?" "Everything we can," Chun said weakly. "We think it's a resonant cascade in the sensor array, but we can't isolate the frequency." Lawson just stared at him, his silence more terrifying than any shout. The investors were not just buying a helicopter, they were buying certainty. They were buying the legendary reliability of Lawson Dynamics. And now, that legend was turning to dust. In the corner of the observation deck, a woman worked silently, erasing the presence of the powerful men who occupied the space. Clara Hayes moved with a quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible. For 10 years, she had been the head of the cleaning staff at Lawson Dynamics. She polished the conference tables where billion-dollar deals were made. She emptied the trash cans filled with discarded ideas and coffee cups. She understood the rhythms of this place better than anyone. She knew the calm before a breakthrough and the tense, charged atmosphere that preceded a collapse. Today, the air felt like a final, held breath. Beside her, sitting on a small stool, was her daughter, Abigail. At 12 years old, Abby was a slip of a girl with straw-blonde hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Her face was dotted with a few faint freckles across her nose. She was supposed to be in school, but a teacher workday had left Clara with no other option than to bring her to work. Abby was quiet, lost in the pages of a worn, leather-bound notebook. She wasn't writing, she was sketching. With a startlingly precise hand, she drew complex mechanical diagrams. Gears and rotors, pistons and drive shafts. To any casual observer, it was just childish doodling. It was not. Abby felt the tension in the room. She heard the frustration in Mr. Lawson's voice. She had been coming here with her mother on odd days for years. She loved the hangar. She loved the smell of machine oil and the sight of the incredible flying machines. She loved the Osprey X-1 most of all. She thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was hurting. Down on the hangar floor, the engineering team tried one last, desperate measure. They initiated another simulation, this time bypassing a series of software protocols. They hoped to force the error to reveal itself. Simulation running. A technician's voice crackled over the intercom. The entire building seemed to hold its breath. On the massive screens above the hangar floor, data streamed in green, healthy lines. 1 minute. 2. 5 minutes. Hope began to flicker in David Chen's eyes. 8 minutes. 9 minutes. The room was silent. Then, at exactly 9 minutes and 17 seconds, it happened. The data streams on the screen flashed red. An alarm blared, a screeching, synthetic sound of defeat. The 3D model of the Osprey X-1 on the main monitor shuddered and then locked into a fatal, spinning dive. Failure. The technician's voice said, flat and final. Catastrophic, gyroscopic destabilization. A collective groan went through the observation deck. David Chen slumped against the glass, his face ashen. Richard Lawson exploded. The carefully controlled facade of the powerful CEO shattered, revealing the desperate, terrified man beneath. He slammed his fist on the mahogany railing, the sound cracking through the hangar like a rifle shot. Useless, he roared, his voice raw with fury. He spun on David Chen. A whole team of the best engineers money can buy, and you can't fix one goddamn helicopter. What is wrong with you? He paced, his rage needing a target, any target. His eyes swept the room, past the defeated engineers, past the anxious board members, and landed on the quiet corner where Clara and her daughter were trying to disappear into the wallpaper. He saw Abby, her head bowed over her sketchbook. A cruel, ugly idea sparked in his mind. It was a way to deflect, to mock the failure of his educated, expensive team. He pointed a trembling finger at the 12-year-old girl. What's the matter, Chun? Lawson sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Can't figure it out? Maybe we should ask the janitor's kid. Maybe she's got the magic answer in her little coloring book. Several of the executives chuckled nervously. Chun looked horrified. Clara froze, her hand tightening on the handle of her cleaning cart, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and protective anger. Lawson wasn't done. He strode toward Abby, a bitter, mocking smile on his face. He was performing now, a king deriding his court jesters for the benefit of his audience. Tell you what, he announced to the room, his voice booming with false bravado. I'm feeling generous today. Anyone can fix this helicopter, and I'll give them $100 million. Hell, fix this helicopter, little girl, and I'll give you $100 million. The laughter that followed was louder this time, a release of the terrible tension that had gripped them all. It was a joke, a cruel, Ridiculous joke. But Abby wasn't laughing. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't even looked up at him. She had heard only one phrase that mattered. One phrase that cut through the CEO's angry tirade and her mother's silent fear. Resonant cascade. Her pencil stopped moving. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes, a clear, intelligent blue, were not those of a frightened child. They were the eyes of someone who understood. She looked past the mocking face of Richard Lawson, past the defeated engineers, and stared at the beautiful, broken machine on the hangar floor. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, a low, gentle rumble like a well-tuned engine. Most folks, they look at a machine, Abby girl. They use their eyes. But the important stuff, the secrets, you can't see those. You have to listen. A quiet, steadying calm settled over her. She knew what was wrong with the Osprey X1. It wasn't a ghost in the software. It was a whisper in the steel. A whisper her grandfather had taught her how to hear. Clara put a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. Abby, let's go. We're in the way. Abby didn't move. She took a small breath. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost lost in the vastness of the hangar, she spoke. It's not the sensors, she said. The laughter died instantly. Every head on the observation deck turned toward her. Richard Lawson's mocking smile froze on his face. David Chin stared, his mouth slightly agape. What did you say? Lawson asked, his voice losing its mocking edge and taking on a dangerous curiosity. Abby stood up, clutching her sketchbook to her chest like a shield. She looked directly at the lead engineer, David Chun. You're looking for a frequency, she said, her voice clear and steady. But it's not a frequency. It's a vibration. A sympathetic vibration. It's too small for your sensors to pick up until it's too late. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of failure. It was the silence of utter, profound disbelief. A 12-year-old girl, the daughter of the cleaning lady, was standing in the heart of a multi-billion-dollar crisis, talking about sympathetic vibrations as if she were discussing her homework. Richard Lawson stared at her, his mind struggling to process what was happening. He had meant to mock her, to use her as a prop in his theater of rage. But the look in her eyes was not that of a child playing make-believe. It was a look of absolute, unshakable certainty. The world seemed to shrink, focusing on the small girl in the oversized blue sweater. The fate of Lawson Dynamics had just been placed, by the CEO's own foolish words, into her hands. And the real story, the one that would be told for decades to come, was just beginning. The executives and engineers stared at Abby as if she had just sprouted wings. Richard Lawson's face was a mask of confusion. The cruel joke he had made had suddenly taken on a life of its own, and he didn't know how to react. Sympathetic vibration? David Chin finally stammered, taking a step forward. He looked from Abby to her mother, as if seeking an explanation for this bizarre interruption. How? How would you know a term like that? Clara felt a wave of panic. I'm so sorry, Mr. Lawson, Mr. Chun. She doesn't know what she's saying. Abby, apologize and let's go. She tugged gently on her daughter's arm. But Abby stood her ground. My grandpa taught me, she said simply, her gaze still fixed on Chun. He was a mechanic. Sergeant Major Frank Hayes. A new ripple went through the room. A few of the older board members exchanged glances. The name was not unknown. Frankie, Hayes was a legend in certain military circles. A helicopter crew chief from the Vietnam era, a man famous for keeping his birds in the air with little more than duct tape, sheer willpower, and an uncanny understanding of machinery. He was a mechanical whisperer, a man who could diagnose a failing engine by the change in its pitch from a quarter-mile away. But he had passed away 3 years ago. An older man at the back of the group stepped forward. He wore a simple suit, but his posture was ramrod straight. It was General Miller, retired, a Pentagon consultant, and one of the key figures the investors listened to. He had known of Frankie Hayes. Your grandfather was Frank Hayes? Miller asked, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. His eyes, sharp and discerning, studied Abby with a new level of interest. He was one of the best crew chiefs the Army ever had. He kept my unit flying through the monsoon season of '69. Richard Lawson saw his opportunity shifting. The narrative was slipping from his grasp. His initial plan to use the girl as a scapegoat for his team's failure was backfiring. The mention of a decorated war veteran, a man respected by the very people he needed to impress, changed the dynamic. He couldn't simply dismiss her now without looking like a fool. A cruel, new idea began to form. He could still control this. He could turn this bizarre interruption into the ultimate corporate spectacle. Well, Lawson said, his voice regaining its theatrical boom. He spread his hands wide, a sardonic smile returning to his lips. It seems we have an expert in our midst. An expert in sympathetic vibrations. The words dripped with condescension, but there was a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. He was a gambler, and this was the most audacious bet of his life. Fine, he declared, his voice echoing through the silent hangar. The offer stands. You said $100 million, Richard. General Miller reminded him quietly, his tone holding a clear warning. I know what I said, Lawson snapped, then turned his full attention on Abby. You think you know what's wrong with my $2 billion aircraft. You think you can fix what this entire team of MIT geniuses can't. He walked until he was standing directly in front of her, towering over the small girl. He was no longer mocking. He was challenging. Here's the deal, little Miss Hayes. You get 1 hour. You and your grandpa's stories. You go down there, you look at my helicopter. You tell my engineers what to do. The investors and the Pentagon delegation will be here soon. They were supposed to see a flight demonstration. Instead, they'll get a show. They'll get to see you try to fix it. Clara gasped. Mr. Lawson, you can't be serious. She's a child. She's the one who spoke up, Lawson retorted, his eyes locked on Abby. If she succeeds, he continued, his voice rising, I will personally write a check for $100 million to her, her mother, her dog, whoever she wants. It's a publicity stunt that will make us legendary. The girl genius who saved Lawson Dynamics. He paused, letting the absurd promise hang in the air. Then, his voice dropped to a cold, menacing whisper. But when you fail, and you will fail, this little show is over. Security will escort you and your mother from the premises. And I'll make sure she never works in this town again. I will not have my company, my life's work, made a mockery of on the most important day of its existence. The room was deathly quiet. It was a monstrous, cruel ultimatum. He was leveraging a child's innocent comment against her mother's livelihood. He was setting her up for a public humiliation of epic proportions, a story he could spin to the investors as a sign of his team's impossible challenge. The problem was so complex, we even let a child try her hand at it. David Chun and his team looked on, horrified. This had gone far beyond a technical problem. It was a display of corporate cruelty that made them all deeply uncomfortable. General Miller stepped forward again. Lawson, this is inappropriate. She is a child. She is a Hayes, Abby said, her own voice cutting through the tension. Everyone stopped. Abby looked up at the towering CEO, her blue eyes clear and unwavering. There was no fear in them, only resolve. The same resolve her grandfather had when staring into the guts of a failing engine with enemy fire overhead. My grandfather didn't believe in problems that couldn't be solved, she said. He believed in people who didn't listen properly. I'll do it. Clara grabbed her daughter's hand. Abby, no. Please. It's okay, Mom, Abby said, giving her mother's hand a reassuring squeeze. She then looked at the general. My grandpa said you could always trust a man who respected the machine, sir. Then she turned back to Lawson. But you have to promise. The money isn't for me. It's for a foundation. In my grandfather's name. For kids who want to learn how to fix things. Lawson was taken aback. This was not the reaction he expected. He expected tears, fear, a retraction. Instead, he was being met with conditions. The sheer audacity of it amused him. A foundation, huh? He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. You can have your foundation. You can have a solid gold helicopter for all I care. If you fix it. He gestured grandly toward the hangar floor. The stage is yours, Miss Hayes. Your hour starts now. General Miller gave a curt nod. I'll act as the official observer. To ensure the terms are met. Fair is fair. His presence gave the bizarre challenge a veneer of legitimacy, and Lawson knew he couldn't back down now. Abby, clutching her precious sketchbook, walked toward the door leading to the hangar floor. Her mother followed, her face a storm of fear and pride. As Abby passed David Chun, she paused. I'll need a few things, she said, her voice businesslike. A mechanic's stethoscope, a set of tuning forks, and a simple glass of water, filled to the brim. The lead engineer could only nod, completely bewildered. He had multi-million-dollar spectrum analyzers and laser vibrometers at his disposal. And this little girl was asking for tools that belonged in the 19th century. As Abby stepped out onto the vast hangar floor, the team of 30 engineers parted before her like the Red Sea. They stared, their expressions a mixture of pity, disbelief, and a tiny, desperate spark of hope. She was a ridiculous, impossible long shot. But she was the only shot they had left. The huge hangar clock started its silent countdown. 59 minutes and 59 seconds remaining. Abby walked toward the silent, monolithic Osprey X-1, a small David approaching a metallic Goliath. She was not just fighting for a helicopter. She was fighting for her mother's job, her grandfather's legacy, and a future she was inventing with every steady, courageous step. The hangar floor was a cathedral of technology. The Osprey X-1 sat on the polished concrete like a shrine to modern engineering. Its sleek, gray body absorbed the bright overhead lights, and its complex rotor systems were marvels of computer-aided design. Surrounding it was a maze of diagnostic carts, laptops displaying endless lines of code, and tool chests filled with specialized, expensive instruments. Into this scene walked Abby, a figure from another time. The engineers, men and women with advanced degrees and decades of experience, watched her with a tense, awkward silence. They had been ordered by Lawson to give her whatever she asked for, an instruction that felt both demeaning and surreal. David Chen approached her cautiously, holding the requested items. "Here you are," he said, handing her the stethoscope, a case of gleaming tuning forks, and a simple water glass. What are you going to do?" Abby didn't answer right away. She walked a slow circle around the base of the helicopter, her small hand trailing lightly along its cool metallic skin. She was not looking at the complex machinery with the eyes of an engineer. She was observing it, sensing it, the way her grandfather had taught her. "Every machine has a story, Abby girl," his voice echoed in her mind. "Before you ever pick up a wrench, you learn to read that story. You look for the little things. The faint stress lines the other guys miss. The whisper of a loose rivet. The secret sag in a support beam." She stopped beneath the main fuselage, directly under the housing for the gyroscopic stabilization unit. This was the heart of the problem. A black box of digital magic that was supposed to keep the Osprey X-1 perfectly balanced. "I need you to open this access panel," she said, pointing to a plate just above her head. "And I need you to run the engine sequence. Not the full flight simulation, just the engine startup and idle. For exactly 3 minutes. Chen hesitated, then nodded to one of his technicians. "You heard her. Open panel C7 and run the low RPM diagnostic." The engineers exchanged baffled looks. A 3-minute idle was a basic warm-up. They had done it 100 times. It never revealed anything. But they did as they were told. A technician with a power driver quickly removed the panel, exposing a dense web of wiring, hydraulic lines, and a central, silver-colored mounting bracket that held the gyroscope's primary sensor array. "Panels open," the technician confirmed. "Okay," Abby said, taking a deep breath. "Start the sequence." From the control booth, the command was sent. A low whine began to build as the Osprey's powerful turbines spooled up. The sound grew into a deep, resonant hum that filled the hangar and vibrated through the concrete floor. The massive rotor blades remained still, disengaged from the engines for the ground test. The engineers watched their monitors, which showed nothing but green lights and stable readings. This was familiar territory. Nothing ever went wrong at idle. But Abby wasn't looking at the monitors. She took the mechanic's stethoscope, an instrument designed to listen to the internal workings of an engine, and placed the cold metal diaphragm directly onto the silver mounting bracket. She closed her eyes. The hangar was filled with the roar of the engines, a deafening wall of industrial sound. But through the stethoscope, Abby heard a different world. She heard the smooth whir of bearings, the steady flow of hydraulic fluid, the electronic pulse of the sensors. It was a symphony of machinery. She listened intently, moving the stethoscope a few inches at a time across the bracket's surface. On the observation deck, Lawson watched with a smirk. "What is she doing?" "Playing doctor," he said to one of the investors who had arrived early. The investor, a cautious man named Mr. Peterson, just watched, his expression unreadable. "Listen past the noise, kiddo," her grandfather's voice coached her. "The big sounds are there to distract you. You're listening for the thing that doesn't belong." The little cricket chirping in the middle of a thunderstorm. And then she heard it. It was faint, incredibly faint, A tiny, high-frequency ping. It wasn't regular. It was intermittent, almost random. A sound so insignificant that any normal mechanic would have dismissed it as background noise. But to Abby, it was a scream. She opened her eyes. "There," she whispered. She took one of the tuning forks from the case, one marked with the number 440 for the A note, and gently tapped it against her shoe. It hummed with a perfect, clear tone. She pressed its base against the bracket, next to where she had heard the sound. For a moment, the tuning fork's vibration seemed to cancel out the ping. "Sympathetic," she murmured. She then took the glass of water. Her hand was perfectly steady as she held it up. "I need one of you to hold this for me," she said to the nearest technician. "Right here. Don't let it touch the bracket, but get it as close as you can." The young engineer, a woman named Beth, looked at Chun for approval. He gave a slight nod. Beth took the glass, her own hands trembling slightly, and held it just a millimeter away from the metal surface. "Shut down the engines," Abby commanded. The deep roar of the turbines began to wind down, the noise slowly receding. As the hangar grew quieter, everyone watched the glass of water. The surface was perfectly still, like a tiny silver mirror. "Okay," Abby said. "Now, look closely at the mounting bracket. Right here." She pointed to a spot near one of the main bolts. "You see it?" David Chen leaned in, his eyes straining. The other engineers crowded around, their skepticism warring with a desperate curiosity. At first, they saw nothing. Just a solid piece of milled aluminum, bolted securely to the aircraft's frame. "I don't see anything," Chen confessed. "Keep looking," Abby insisted. "It's not a crack on the surface. It's in the metal." She took a small cleaning cloth from her mother's cart, which Clara had quietly wheeled nearby. She wiped the bracket clean, removing any trace of oil or dust. "You need to look at it from the side, with the light hitting it just right," she explained. General Miller had come down from the observation deck and now stood with the engineers. His old eyes, accustomed to spotting details others missed, narrowed. He squatted down, looking at the bracket from a low angle. "My God," he breathed. "The girl's right." He pointed. As the overhead lights reflected off the polished metal, a line so faint it was nearly invisible could be seen. It wasn't a crack from damage. It was a hairline fracture, a flaw in the metal itself, likely created during the manufacturing process when the bracket was forged. It was a 1 in a million defect. "A microfracture," Beth whispered in awe. "But that wouldn't be enough to cause a catastrophic failure. The stress models would account for far more." "It's not about stress," Abby explained, her confidence growing. "It's about music." She turned to Chun. "When the engines run, that tiny crack vibrates. It's a very small, very high-frequency vibration. Your sensors can't detect it because they're programmed to filter out background noise. But the vibration is there. It's like a single violin string playing a note that is just a little bit out of tune." She picked up the case of tuning forks. "For the first few minutes, it doesn't matter. But the gyroscopic system is also vibrating. Everything is. The engines, the airframe, all of it. They're all playing their own notes. And they're all in tune with each other." She looked at the faces around her, seeing the dawning understanding. "But that little crack, its note doesn't belong. As the system runs, the energy builds. The vibrations start to match up. It's called resonant cascade. The tiny, wrong vibration from the crack gets amplified by all the other vibrations in the system. It gets louder and louder, but not in a way you can hear. It's a vibration that builds in strength." She paused, making sure they followed. At 9 minutes and 17 seconds, that vibration becomes so powerful that it overwhelms the gyroscopic sensor. It's like screaming directly into someone's ear while they're trying to listen to a whisper. The sensor can no longer tell which way is up. It sends faulty data to the flight computers, and the computers think the aircraft is falling. They try to correct a problem that doesn't exist, and that's what sends the Osprey into the spin. The hangar was utterly silent, save for the faint hum of the lights. The team of engineers stood frozen, looking back and forth between the 12-year-old girl and the multi-billion-dollar helicopter. She had just explained their impossible problem with the simple analogy of an out-of-tune violin. It was so simple, so elegant, and so deeply rooted in the physical world, not the digital one they had been lost in for weeks. They had been searching for a software ghost, but the problem was a flaw in the machine's very bones. David Chen stared at the hairline fracture, then at Abby. He felt a wave of professional shame, immediately followed by a profound sense of awe. How? How could you possibly know that? He asked, his voice filled with genuine wonder. Abby clutched her sketchbook. My grandpa worked on old Hueys in the war. He said they were filled with ghosts, vibrations from battle damage and years of hard flying. He said you couldn't always replace the parts, so you had to learn to live with the ghosts. You had to learn how to quiet them down. Up on the observation deck, Richard Lawson watched on the high-definition monitor, his face pale. His jaw, once set in a hard line of arrogance, was now slack with disbelief. Mr. Peterson, the investor, stood beside him, a slow smile spreading across his face. Well, Richard, Peterson said quietly, it seems your $100 million joke is about to get very, very real. The hangar clock showed 42 minutes remaining. Abby had found the ghost. Now, she had to show them how to tame it. The revelation hung in the air of the hangar, as tangible as the scent of jet fuel. A single, almost invisible flaw in a simple mounting bracket was the undoing of the most advanced aircraft on the planet. The team of engineers, who had spent weeks lost in a wilderness of code and complex schematics, were now staring at a problem they could see and touch. They were humbled and, in a strange way, relieved. Richard Lawson, watching from above, felt a cold dread mix with a bizarre sense of exhilaration. This was impossible. This was a nightmare. This was the greatest story in the history of his company. His mind, always calculating, was already spinning the narrative. But first, the problem had to be solved. So, a faulty bracket, he said over the intercom, his voice tight. So we replace it. Get it done. Now, we can't, David Chin called back, his voice strained. That's a custom-forged component. A new one would take 6 weeks to manufacture and certify. We don't have 6 weeks. We have about 35 minutes. A wave of despair washed over the team again. They had found the disease, but they had no cure. The demonstration was still doomed. No. Abby's quiet voice cut through the gloom. You don't need a new one. You just need to change the music. All eyes turned back to her. She was looking at the bracket, not as a broken part, but as an instrument that needed to be retuned. She opened her sketchbook. The pages were not filled with childish drawings, but with detailed, hand-drawn diagrams from her grandfather. There were notes in the margins, written in a strong, clear script. One page showed the rotor assembly of an old Bell Huey helicopter. There was a drawing of a small, weighted piece of metal bolted to the gearbox casing, with an arrow pointing to it and a note that read, "The shake started after we took a .50 cal hit near Saigon. Couldn't replace the whole transmission, so we gave the ghost something else to chew on." Quieted her right down. We can't stop the vibration from the crack, Abby explained, turning the book around for Chun and the others to see. But we can dampen it. We can give it a counter-frequency. My grandpa called them listeners. Little pieces of metal or rubber that absorb the bad vibrations before they can spread. She pointed to a spot on the bracket, away from the fracture. We need to add a small amount of weight, right here. It has to be the right weight, and it has to be attached in a way that it can absorb the specific frequency of the fracture. It will act like a shock absorber for the vibration, canceling it out before it can build into the resonant cascade. It was a beautifully simple solution, an idea born not in a sterile lab, but in the muddy, desperate reality of a battlefield workshop. It was the kind of practical, brilliant fix that modern engineers, with their reliance on digital perfection and component replacement, had forgotten how to even conceive. A harmonic dampener. Beth, the young engineer, said with a flash of recognition from her university physics classes. Of course, it's textbook theory, but I've never seen it applied like this. So elegantly. Okay, David Chin said, his mind now racing. He was fully on board. The child was leading, and he was following. What do we need? What kind of weight? How much? We don't have time to machine a proper one, Abby said, thinking fast. We need something simple. Rubber is good. It absorbs vibrations well. She looked around the hangar, her eyes scanning the equipment carts. She spotted a set of solid rubber chocks used to keep a maintenance cart from rolling. There, she said. One of those. A technician sprinted to the cart and brought back one of the heavy, black rubber blocks. It's too big, Abby said. I need a piece from the middle, about the size of a silver dollar. And we need to know its exact weight. Chin barked orders. Give me a cutting tool and a digital scale. Now, move. The team, which had been paralyzed by uncertainty for weeks, now moved with a feverish, unified purpose. Within 2 minutes, a technician had carefully cut a small, circular piece from the rubber chock. He placed it on a sensitive digital scale. 31.7 grams, he announced. Abby did a quick calculation in her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her grandfather had taught her the rough math. The relationship between the frequency of a vibration and the mass required to dampen it. It's close, she said. A little too heavy. Shave a bit off. We need it to be exactly 29 grams. How can you possibly know that? Chen asked, amazed by her precision. It's the harmonic opposite of the vibration I heard through the stethoscope, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The ping was very high, around 3,000 hertz. To cancel it, you need a mass that resonates at a frequency that is naturally out of phase. 29 grams is what my grandpa's charts say for a vibration that sounds like that. She tapped a page in her sketchbook where a handwritten table correlated engine sounds with dampening weights. The technician carefully shaved a thin sliver of rubber from the disc and placed it back on the scale. 29.03 grams. Close enough, Abby declared. Now, we need to attach it. She looked at the bracket again. We can't drill a new hole. That would weaken the structure. We need to use one of the existing service bolts. She pointed to a small bolt near the edge of the bracket. That one. We'll remove it, place the rubber dampener underneath, and bolt it back down. The pressure will hold the rubber in place, and it will be in the perfect position to absorb the vibration from the fracture before it can travel to the sensor. The plan was audacious. They were about to modify a critical component on a $2 billion aircraft based on the instructions of a 12-year-old girl, using a piece of a wheel chock. On the observation deck, Richard Lawson was on the phone with the head of his legal department. Is it certified? Is it legal? He hissed. I don't care. Just tell me if the whole thing is going to explode. General Miller walked over to Lawson. Richard, he said, his voice calm but firm. For 3 weeks, your team has failed. That girl down there has done more in the last 20 minutes with a stethoscope and a glass of water than your entire department has with all their supercomputers. I suggest you let her finish. Lawson slammed the phone down. He gave a sharp nod to Chun over the intercom. Do it. With the focused precision of a bomb disposal team, the engineers went to work. The service bolt was carefully removed. The small, 29-gram rubber disc, the haze damper, as Beth had already started calling it, was placed over the hole. The bolt was reinserted and torqued down to the exact specification. It looked absurdly simple, a tiny black dot on a piece of high-tech silver metal. It's done, Chen announced, his voice tight with tension. Abby walked up to the bracket and placed her hand on it. She closed her eyes for a moment. She could no longer hear the faint, discordant whisper. There was only the solid, steady silence of the machine. Okay, she said. Run the simulation. The full one. The hangar fell silent again. Every engineer returned to their station. On the observation deck, the early investors, along with Lawson and the general, were glued to the main screen. Clara Hayes stood near the back, twisting a cleaning rag in her hands, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was praying. Initiating full flight simulation, the technician's voice announced, and the words echoed with the weight of destiny. The simulation began. The 3D model of the Osprey X-1 lifted off the virtual runway. The data streams were all green. 1 minute passed. 3, 5. The aircraft on the screen performed a series of complex aerial maneuvers, the data holding steady. The clock in the corner of the screen ticked past the 8-minute mark. The tension in the hangar was unbearable. Everyone held their breath. 9 minutes. The camera zoomed in on the simulation clock. 9 minutes and 10 seconds. 11, 12. The dreaded 17-second mark arrived and passed. The helicopter on the screen did not shudder. The data streams remained a beautiful, solid green. No alarms blared. A stunned silence held for a moment, and then someone started to clap. The applause grew, starting with the engineers and spreading through the control booth and the observation deck. It became a roar, a tidal wave of relief and disbelief and pure, unadulterated joy. 10 minutes. 12. 15. The Osprey X-1 continued its flawless virtual flight. The ghost was gone. The whisper had been silenced. A 12-year-old girl had done the impossible. Abby stood watching the screen, a small, tired smile on her face. Her grandfather had been right. You just had to listen. David Chin approached her, his eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude and awe. I don't know what to say, he managed. Thank you. Upstairs, Richard Lawson slowly sank into his chair. His face was ashen. His jaw was literally hanging open. He looked at the screen, then at the small girl on the hangar floor, then at the checkbook sitting on his desk. He had made a promise in front of the most important people in his professional life. $100 million. The demonstration was saved. His company was saved. And his entire world had just been turned upside down by a quiet girl with a sketchbook, the daughter of his maid. The reckoning was coming. The successful simulation ran for a full 30 minutes before David Chun ordered it shut down. The mood in the hangar had transformed. The oppressive cloud of despair had been replaced by a giddy, electric sense of victory. The engineers were laughing, shaking hands, and patting each other on the back. But most of all, they were looking at Abby with a reverence usually reserved for engineering legends like Sikorsky or the Wright brothers. She had not only saved the project, she had reminded them of a fundamental truth they had forgotten, that for all their advanced technology, at the heart of every great machine is a simple, elegant mechanical principle. The doors to the observation deck slid open, and the delegation of investors and Pentagon officials, who had been quietly escorted in during the final minutes of the simulation, walked into the room. They had seen the end of the test. They had seen the flawless data. They had heard the spontaneous applause. They were smiling. Mr. Peterson, the lead investor, strode directly to Richard Lawson. Richard, he said, his voice booming with enthusiasm. I don't know what kind of last-minute magic you people pulled off, but that was the most impressive demonstration of system reliability I have ever seen. You asked for $5 billion for the initial contract. We're prepared to offer $7 billion. On one condition. Lawson, still reeling, stood up shakily. Condition? Peterson pointed down to the hangar floor, where Abby was now standing with her mother, looking slightly overwhelmed by the attention. We want to know more about your special projects division, the one run by that young lady down there. Lawson's mouth opened, but no words came out. The narrative he had been frantically trying to construct, one where he, the brilliant CEO, had fostered a culture of innovation so powerful that solutions could come from anywhere, crumbled to dust. The investors weren't buying his story. They were buying hers. General Miller stepped forward, a grimly satisfied look on his face. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Abigail Hayes, granddaughter of the late Sergeant Major Frank Hayes. It appears she has inherited the family gift for machinery. He then turned to Lawson, his voice dropping so only those nearby could hear. And Richard, I believe you have a promise to keep, one which my colleagues and I witnessed you make. The color drained from Lawson's face. All eyes in the room were on him. This was the moment of reckoning, played out on the stage he himself had so cruelly set. He was trapped by his own arrogance. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and descended to the hangar floor. The engineers parted for him, their expressions a mixture of triumph and anticipation. They, too, had heard his mocking offer. They were waiting to see what he would do. Lawson walked until he stood before Abby and her mother. He looked down at the 12-year-old girl who held the entire future of his company in her hands. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. In his eyes, for the first time, was a glimmer of genuine respect. And something else, humility. Miss Hayes, he began, his voice quiet and formal. I owe you an apology. He glanced at Clara, whose face was a mixture of pride and lingering apprehension. To both of you, my behavior was inexcusable. I was under a great deal of pressure, but that is no excuse for my cruelty. He paused, then continued. You did something that my entire multi-million-dollar research and development team could not. You saved this company. You saved the jobs of every single person in this building. And I am a man of my word. He pulled a checkbook and a pen from his jacket pocket. It was a gesture of pure corporate theater, but it was real. The engineers, the investors, the generals, everyone watched in silence as Richard Lawson, one of the most powerful and ruthless CEOs in the country, began to write. He wrote, the Frank Hayes Engineering Foundation on the payee line. In the amount box, he wrote, $100 million. He tore the check from the book with a soft, definitive rip and held it out to Abby. Your foundation is now funded, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You can help a generation of kids learn how to listen to the machines, just like you do. Abby looked at the check, then up at the powerful man. She didn't reach for it. Thank you, Mr. Lawson, she said politely. But my grandpa always said that a job's not done until the paperwork is clean. She looked him directly in the eye. I want something else. I want you to run the foundation. With my mom. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Lawson was floored. Me? Yes, Abby said with unwavering logic. You know how to run big companies and handle lots of money. And my mom? She knows what it's like for people who work hard but don't always get a chance to be heard. You two can make sure the money goes to the right kids. The ones who like to fix things but maybe can't afford the fancy schools. It was a move of such simple, profound genius that it left Lawson speechless. She wasn't just accepting his payment. She was giving him a purpose, a chance at redemption. She was making him a partner in her grandfather's legacy. A slow smile spread across General Miller's face. David Chin shook his head in wonder. This child was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Richard Lawson looked from the check in his hand to Clara Hayes, who stood beside her daughter with a newfound strength and dignity. He saw not a cleaning lady, but a woman of integrity. He looked at Abby and saw not a child, but a visionary. He slowly tore the check in half. You're right, he said. A check isn't good enough. This requires something more permanent. He turned to his legal counsel. Draw up the paperwork for the foundation. Initial funding of $100 million from my personal assets. And create a new executive position. Director of the foundation. The position is offered to Mrs. Clara Hayes, effective immediately. He then looked back at Abby. And we are creating a new role for you, too. Junior engineering consultant, with a full scholarship to any university you choose when the time comes. Your first task will be to teach my engineers how to listen. For the first time that day, Abby broke into a wide, genuine smile. Her mother rushed to her, wrapping her in a fierce hug, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. The hangar erupted in applause, louder and more heartfelt than before. It wasn't just for the safe contract or the brilliant solution. It was for the profound, unexpected justice of the moment. It was the sight of arrogance being humbled by innocence, of prejudice being dismantled by quiet competence. Richard Lawson watched the mother and daughter, a changed man. He had started the day as a king on the verge of losing his kingdom. He was ending it as a servant to a better, more hopeful idea, a legacy he would now build not just out of steel and circuits, but out of opportunity and grace. 6 months later, the scent of machine oil and hot metal, once a symbol of corporate desperation, now smelled of hope. The Frank Hayes Engineering Foundation wasn't just a wing of the Lawson Dynamics facility, it was its new heart. The vast, sunlit workshop hummed with a different kind of energy, not the tense silence of a looming deadline, but the chaotic, joyful noise of discovery. Teenagers from every corner of the city, who might otherwise have never touched a wrench, were hunched over workbenches. They were learning to meticulously disassemble, diagnose, and rebuild everything from lawnmower engines to complex hydraulic pumps. Their instructors a cadre of retired mechanics, their faces etched with the wisdom of 1,000 repaired machines. Clara Hayes moved through the room, her smart business suit no longer feeling like a costume. She stopped at a bench where a 16-year-old girl named Maria was frowning at a stubborn carburetor. It's flooded, Maria said, frustrated. I keep trying to clear it, but it's not working. Your grandfather had a trick for that, Clara said, her voice warm. She didn't give the answer. Instead, she picked up a small, clean rag. He said sometimes you have to be gentle. You're trying to force it. Try persuading it. The simple advice, a piece of wisdom from one mechanic passed down through 2 generations, shifted the young girl's perspective. A few minutes later, the engine sputtered to life with a clean, satisfying roar. Richard Lawson watched the scene from the doorway, a soft smile on his face. He'd spent his life building an empire on brute force and intimidation. Now, he was co-piloting a venture built on patience and persuasion. Earlier that week, a board member had proposed selling the foundation's educational patents for a quick and substantial profit. The old Lawson would have jumped at the chance. The new Lawson calmly explained that the foundation's wealth wasn't in its patents, but in the confidence it was building in young people like Maria. The board member had been silenced not by a threat, but by an unshakable, newfound principle. The partnership between him and Clara had become the company's true guiding gyroscope. She brought the humanity. He brought the structure. Together, they were building something far more valuable than a helicopter. Across the country, that helicopter was making headlines. The Osprey X-1 fleet was performing flawlessly in the field. News articles praised its unprecedented reliability and agility. General Miller, in an interview, called it the most dependable bird the Army has ever flown, adding a cryptic comment that its resilience came from an old soul's wisdom. On the access panel of every Osprey, beneath the housing for the gyroscopic stabilizer, the small plate was a silent testament to that wisdom. It read, Component HD 29. The haze damper. It was a permanent part of the engineering lexicon, a reminder that sometimes the most elegant solution is also the simplest. Back in the main R&D hangar, the engineers gathered around a new prototype, a next-generation engine for a high-altitude surveillance drone. The atmosphere was different now. There was less frantic typing and more quiet contemplation. They had learned to pause, to listen. Their teacher stood on a small stool, pointing at a complex schematic on the main screen. "You're trying to eliminate the vibration," Abby said, her voice clear and steady. "But you can't. The engine needs to vibrate to work. You just need to give it a calmer rhythm. You need to listen to what it wants to do, not just tell it what it has to do." The engineers, men and women with doctorates and decades of experience, listened with rapt attention. They no longer saw a child. They saw their most valuable consultant, the one who had taught them that the most important diagnostic tool wasn't a computer, but a curious and empathetic mind. Abby Hayes was no longer just the maid's daughter who got lucky. She was the keeper of her grandfather's legacy, the girl who had looked into the heart of a complex machine and found not a ghost, but a song. And she was just beginning to teach the world how to hear it. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comments section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.